this as soon as possible, Mr. Chair.
Okay. So, yes, Mr. Gerard. Mr. Dittel.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very happy to see everybody on this Friday afternoon. I would like to invoke 1064, which allows the holding of urgent meetings. I would like to start the debate. I'd like to move a motion so that we can discuss the topic that was in the letter that the chair received on November 12th that was signed by 6 parliamentarians, MPs who sit on this very committee.
Okay, so that's a motion. So that's dilatory, so we move on this motion, correct?
Oui.
Clerk?
Yeah.
So we'll call. Who's in favor of the motion?
Oh, that was his motion.
That was to move the motion, yes. He just read the motion.
It's not dilatory.
It's not dilatory, but we're going to move this motion that he just read.
You have a speaking list.
Oh, I see the motion. He moved to go to the 1064, so that's a dilatory.
Okay. So according to the clerk, he moved to the 1064, which is the emergency meeting, so that is a dilatory motion. So we will be voting on that, on whether to go to the emergency meeting or not.
One second here. I just need to make sure.
Monsieur le Président, juste
Chair, I just want to make sure that I'll have the correct motion because we'd like to add an amendment. Is this the motion with 3 points? That is inviting the Minister of Environment and Commissioner DeMarco. Is that the correct motion? If you'll allow me, I'd also like to welcome our new MP at the House of Commons. Welcome. I'd also like to welcome Ms. Posey. So just to clarify things, what we're trying to do here is open up the debate using 1064, which allows that, and then talk about the actual debate. So first we're going to talk about why we're meeting, and then after that we'll talk about the actual content. Thank you. I thank the member for that explanation.
Now we got that all straightened out. Call for the vote.
Mr. Ali,
against.
Mr. Longfield,
Against.
Ms. Taylor-Roy,
Against.
Mr. Vancouverden,
Against.
Monsieur Arsenault,
Contre.
Monsieur Datel,
Pour.
Mr. Cram. Let's see him. Oh, thank you. Mr. Leslie,
Yes.
Monsieur Sauvé,
Oui.
Ms. Collins.
In favor.
So it's 5 to 5, so you have the final vote.
Oh,
So you vote.
I vote in favor.
Okay.
Very
So,
good.
All in, yeah.
As motion's carried, and Mr. Deltel shall kick off the debate.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Alors, je fais motion pour...
Thank you very much, Chair. So I move a motion. Since the Commissioner published an audit report stating that, 1, the government was not in line to meet its objectives for 2030, Canada has the worst record of all G7 countries, and 3,
Point of order?
Thank you. I did have my hand up, so I'm curious as to what your speaking order and list might be. I thought I would have the floor following the or on the commencement of a debate on the motion.
I got Mr. Leslie and then you.
So you have Mr. Leslie on the list to speak before me. I spoke before Mr. I spoke before Mr. Deltel, and I seem to be now third on the list. I'd like to question that order, please. I had my hand up first.
Challenging the chair then?
Mr. Chair, point of
If I
order.
need to.
Yep.
Also, Mr. Sauvé had mentioned when the debate was opening right before the vote that he was intending to put forward an amendment. And so my assumption is that he would be on the speaking list as well.
Okay, yes, you are correct. Yeah, his hand's not up, but that is true. Mr. Detel?
Monsieur le Président, avec respect pour
Chair, with all due respect for my colleagues, I'd like to remind everyone that once the vote was passed, then I immediately signaled to you that I wanted to speak, and you recognized me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Point of
perhaps
order,
that-
Mr. Chair. I
yeah.
recognize that that's how it happened. I had my hand up and I spoke into my microphone. I'm not in the room, so I'm at a disadvantage. However, Monsieur Deltal and I both expressed interest at the outset of this meeting to speak, and when that vote concluded, I did again.
And you are on the speaking order list. So,
And as I requested with my point of order, what is the order?
Mr. Leslie, then you.
Point of order, Chair.
Yes, sir.
Since I'm on virtual as well, I could see Mr. Adam Van Coorden. He raised his hand before Mr. Leslie. Just wanted to bring it to your attention.
Monsieur le Président, sur le même point.
Chair, on the same point of order, the committee elected you and you have my complete confidence in choosing the order of speakers. You recognized the speaker for Louis Saint-Laurent, and in any case, I can't make an amendment on a motion that was not tabled, which was my intention. So I think to ensure that everything functions correctly, it would be preferable to let the member for Louis Saint-Laurent finish reading his motion, and then after that we can discuss the content of the motion. But I don't think it's in the interest of Canadians that we lose, that we waste our time on dealing with the order of speakers. We have all the time in the world to deal with the debate.
So,
I have a point of order as well, Mr. Chair.
okay.
I had put my hand up clearly, and I knew it was before Mr. Leslie. I put it up immediately after, and I also was looking at the screen, so I'm not sure how his name came up before mine on the speaking list. So I understand there's only one person in the room, but I think that someone needs to be helping you perhaps to look at when people's hands go up so that they can be recorded as they go up. And on the point of wasting time, I might suggest that this emergency debate is not, in fact, an emergency and could have been dealt with
Well,
at a
that's not a
regular
point of
time,
order.
saving the
That's not a
House
point of
a
order.
great deal of money.
It's not a point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Just hang on. I'm just going to recess here for a second. Not suspend. Just recess. So we get Here now, we'll have Mr. Deltel finish his motion. He hasn't even finished it yet. And then Mr. Sauvé, and then Mr. Leslie, and then Mr. Van Coerden.
Yes.
And then Ms. Collins, and then Ms. Taylor-Roy. That is what we have right now. And away we go. Mr. Deltel.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Je crois que
Thank you, Chair. And so that everything is very clear, I will read the motion from the beginning. So, given that Canada's Commissioner of the Environment released an audit that revealed 1. The government is not on track to meet Canada's 2030 targets for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. 2. Canada has the worst record in the G7 for emissions reductions. 3. The government is using, quote, unreliable emissions reduction estimates and is lacking, quote, transparency on emissions reductions and projections, end quote. The committee hold a minimum of 3 meetings to investigate the Liberal government's emission reduction policies, invite A. Commissioner DeMarco for a 2-hour meeting, B. The Minister of Environment and Climate Change, along with departmental officials for a 2-hour meeting, C. Canada's Climate Change Ambassador for 1 hour, and D. Witnesses submitted by recognized parties for the remaining hour. The meetings take place only after the completion of witness testimony on the committee's study on climate impacts related to the Canadian financial system, and that these meetings be completed by December 13th, 2024. Chair, we'll be able to discuss this in depth, but I'd just like to mention that thanks to Parliament, thanks to our democracy, we all have our different views on reducing GHGs and reducing pollution. We have different opinions on how to get to reduction there, but the reason why we want to hold this meeting here today to make sure that we really debate the true issues when it comes to climate change and proposals from opposition parties is that the Commissioner of the Environment has stated that we are not on the right path. This is not a question of political opinion. This is the Commissioner of the Environment raising a red flag on efficiency, transparency, and the reality, the veracity of the facts. And it says that Canada is not on target, that we have the worst record in the G7. And in fact, we are 62nd among 64 countries. And scientists around the world say that we are one of the worst players when it comes to reducing GHGs. And that's been the situation for the past 9 years. Of course, you can make figures say whatever you want them to say. But Mr. Chair, given that it is the Commissioner of the Environment that has come to these very serious conclusions, we thought it is urgent that we debate this issue that is extremely important to all Canadians.
Mr. Sauvé.
Oui, Monsieur le Président, si quelqu'un m'appuie.
Chair, I am sure that there will be a consent for the amendment, the following amendment. After 2024, we would add that the committee study the impact of climate change, without which the committee study on climate impacts related to the Canadian financial system, that these meetings be completed by December 13th, 2024. So essentially, the goal here is to pursue our work. I think that everybody here in this committee cares about efficiency. We want to complete the studies that we began, and I think that this study is especially important to my colleague, the member for Repentigny. I'm sure that all parliamentarians here are interested in finding solutions so that we can use finance and our financial system in such a way as to ensure that we live in a clean and healthy environment and we fight climate change. Thank you, Chair.
Speaking to the amendment.
You bet. Yep.
I would also like to be on the list for the amendment if that takes precedence over the current debate.
So Ms. Collins.
As would I, please.
Okay, so Ms. Collins, Gerard.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Ms. Collins, Gerard, and then
Oh, sorry. Mr. Vancouver then.
Mr.
Sorry,
Vancouver, and then Taylor Roy. Okay, so who's up first? Ms. Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess I just first wanted to ask the analysts about the feasibility of drafting the report, getting it to us. If we can just get a little bit of information from the analysts about the timelines.
The report would take well into the new year.
Okay, what we're hearing here is the report will take well into the new year to get complete. So I don't know.
And just maybe if the analysts could map out for us, if we wrap up witness testimony by November 25th, when would be the earliest we could get a first draft of the report?
Just going over that now.
Thanks.
So 3 to 4 weeks after the testimony comes in for a draft report.
And I'm just getting the amendment sent or just reading through it right now. And so maybe I can hold the rest of my comments, but I just wanted maybe some clarification from Mr. Sauvé. If we are waiting 3 or 4 weeks, say if we wrap up the witness testimony on November 25th, 3 or 4 weeks from then is going to bring us to the very end of our session if we're still sitting December 17th or so. So it seems like we might not be completed by December 13th, and just wanted to kind of check in with the mover of the amendment if there was some flexibility given what the analysts are telling us.
Est-ce que je dois répondre, Monsieur le Président, tout de go, ou je dois attendre le tour des paroles?
Should I answer immediately or should I wait for my turn? I do apologize. I'm learning how to navigate parliamentary procedure here.
Okay, in talking to the analysts here, it would take longer. The sustainable finance study would actually take longer than the 3 to 4 weeks, because once they compile it, that would take that long, and then they would have to bring it back to the committee to see what we prioritize for the drafting instructions. So you're looking at a good 6 weeks for that, just to get the report all said and done.
Mr. Chair, is there any way we could have some kind of pre-drafting instructions for analysts? Oftentimes before they start writing the report, we make time to give them some pre-drafting instructions, and I'm kind of curious if we could do that again for this, and if that would, if maybe we could amend this amendment to take into consideration what the analysts are telling us.
I'm just going to take a short recess here, and we'll get back to you. got some clarification from the analysts, and basically it comes down to the will of the committee. So we'll go back to the debate, and the motion stands as it is, and that's what will, whether it's the timelines, that is up to basically how the analysts, and whether we want to take priorities, that's for future conversations. Like if we want to say set the water study to the side and then make this one a priority, that is all after the motion passes. So right now we're just debating whether this motion can pass today or not.
Mr. Chair, just a point of clarification so I see at the end of the amendment, it says failing which the meetings on the study shall be completed after the holiday season. So really this amendment is just prioritizing the drafting of this study, which I'm in support of. I just wanted to make sure that we weren't directing the analysts to do something that was impossible for them.
That's good, and that's exactly what I got clarified. It's basically the will of us, and then if they need help with clarifying what their priorities are or not, it comes back to the committee. So we decide on that. So that's good. Thank you, Laura. Patel?
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Bien, en fait, je vous dirais que vous avez...
Thank you, Chair. You've actually taken the words out of my mouth, because we have no issue with the motion tabled by our colleagues at the block, but we do have to take into account the facts that there's a lot of work, which is a good thing, because we were hired to analyze all these things, including finance and the environment, and of course the Environment Commissioner's report. So we are in favor of the amendment, and we hope that everything can be done according to the rules and according to the realities of our agenda. Thank you.
Overton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Appreciate the opportunity to speak to this. I would just start by saying that emergency meetings are to be used in emergencies. And while we are 100% in a climate emergency, and I think some of the members of this committee agree with me on that, that calling this meeting is not, it does not fall into the category of that requirement, especially given that we have the Commissioner for the Environment appearing at this committee, agreed to by all members, on Wednesday of next week at our second meeting. So to have an emergency meeting to discuss whether or not the the Commissioner of the Environment is going to appear seems a little bit presumptuous, or at least seems a little bit premature, especially given that in less than 1 week we'll have an opportunity to discuss these with them. I'd also just question the genuineness, if I can use that word, if it's a word, of some of the members to actually hear from the Minister of the Environment and Climate Change, when instead of filibustering 2 of the previous 3 meetings, we could have had the minister here. He wanted to come to talk about C73. So I welcome the friendly amendment from MP Sauvé to add the C73 study. I have an amendment to that as well, because I would like for the C73 study to be a little bit more rigorous, and to include perhaps multiple days to look at C73 specifically. I'd also say that like 5 times in the last 2 or 3 weeks, I've tried to pass a similar I'm sorry, I think I was confused. I will be moving a motion to add C73 if Mr. Sauvé's amendment doesn't already include it, because again, despite opposition from the Conservatives and the NDP, I've been trying to move a motion to look at C73 for weeks now, and I've been blocked. It's disappointing, because I don't think that biodiversity is such a contentious or partisan issue. I think that we all agree that we need to protect species that are endangered by the triple threat of pollution, climate change, and indeed the loss of biodiversity. But I'd also call into question, I know that Mr. Deltel is sincere when he talks about his desire to lower emissions and fight climate change. He will repeatedly say that Canada is not on track. But by many measurements, we are indeed on track, and we are only on track because of the over 100 measures undertaken by this government to reduce our emissions. And indeed, it is irrefutable that our emissions are now lower than they've been since 1997, and that they would be 41% higher than they are today had we not undertaken these over 100 measures. These over 100 measures have been voted against by conservatives every step of the way for the last 8 or 9 years. And when asked pointedly if they have alternative measures that they'd like to propose to lower emissions, hold oil and gas to account, electrify, decarbonize, and reduce our impact on the environment, they use one word and they say technology in
Point
some
of order, Mr.
ambiguous
Chair.
way.
You got a point of order?
Yeah, I would just like clarity. Are we debating the amendments currently?
I haven't heard an amendment yet.
The friendly amendment from Mr. Sauvé? Is that what we're debating currently?
Yes, so Mr. Sauvé's amendment, that's correct. On whether
Yeah, I'd be curious the relevance of the previous speaker.
I was discussing Canada's whether or not we're on track to meet Canada's greenhouse gas emission reduction targets for 2030, and that's number one in Mr. Sauvé's amendment.
So are you in favor of the amendment, or where are you at?
I'll get to it, Mr. Chair. I think I'm entitled to a few minutes of preamble.
So you are going to amend,
So I'll
or
continue.
you are talking about this, or? Okay, go ahead.
I am talking about this, and thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the point of order, Mr. Leslie. As I was saying, over 100 measures have been undertaken by this government to lower our emissions, and every step of the way the Conservatives have tried to block them. They voted against these measures while not proposing any alternative measures to lower our emissions. So it's pretty rich to hear from the Conservatives that they feel as though we're not on track, despite the evidence to the contrary that we are on track to lower our emissions to the proposed 40 to 45% mark by 2030. And they are lower than they've been since 1997. The year that Connor McDavid was born was the last time our emissions were this high. That's good news, something that we can all celebrate. Innovations from transport to construction, agriculture, even oil and gas have allowed them to be this low. I would say that the innovations put forward by the oil and gas sector and the energy sector more broadly have not been sufficient because they continue to go up, but they have been innovating and lowering their emissions to some degree, or at least their hypothetical ones. They could be a lot higher. But among the over 100 measures undertaken by this government that the Conservatives have continually stood against and voted against are ones that have earned a Nobel Prize in economics, like carbon pricing, but also our clean fuel standard, our phase out of coal, which is astonishing that the Conservatives should stand against that, our plan to have net zero emissions by 2050 with our Accountability Act, our clean growth program, our zero emission vehicle initiatives, which has seen record growth particularly in provinces that also have a zero emissions vehicle standard. Our investments in renewable energies, our investments in carbon capture, utilization and storage, industrial carbon pricing in the oil and gas sector, our investments in green buildings and energy efficiency, our home retrofits, our efforts to reduce plastic waste pollution. In fact, this one draws particular ire given that the Conservatives have brought forward a private member's bill entitled Bring Back the Plastic Bag Bill, because they just can't seem to remember their cotton bags when going to the grocery store, I guess. And their boycott of Tim Hortons and their plant-based lid experiment was another hilarious move by the Conservatives. But even nature-based solutions for climate change and subsidies for green innovation and working towards international leadership and developing those relationships and commitments and collaborations with other jurisdictions, funding for climate adaptation, our work on green energy and green job creation, even electrification of public transit, sustainable agriculture, hydrogen strategies, and our work on environmental, social, and governance initiatives, an acronym that the Conservatives just love to hate, ESG. I don't know why they keep bringing witnesses here to suggest that ESG is a bad thing, that we should focus on the environment and sustainability and better governance and social programs that support people. But once again, Mr. Chair, We have the Commissioner of the Environment coming to this committee on Wednesday, and we did not need to have this emergency meeting to discuss this. We have time in the committee to discuss this. And it's particularly disappointing that the pre-study on Bill C-73 for biodiversity to ensure that we have accountability in that regard has been continuously blocked by the NDP and the Conservatives. I don't know why it needs to be so contentious. Instead, the opposition has been filibustering these meetings, wasting time, and then calling an emergency meeting on a Friday of a sitting week.
Yes, Ms. Collins?
I'm just wondering if Mr. Vancouverton can clarify what he means by the NDP blocking this study. I'm very curious.
Oh, sure. The NDP voted against whether or not we could commence the meeting on C-73. We were set to have the minister last Wednesday, but the NDP decided that they were not in favor of looking at the pre-study on Bill C-73.
That is inaccurate, but...
Right. Well, if we had more than one party support, then we would be studying Bill C-73 right now instead of having a
okay, I think you're way off
debate.
of that. We'll bring this discussion back around here. So what we are
okay, Mr. Chair, I'm not done yet. The floor is still mine, Mr. Chair, and
I thought I'd intervene, but since you're off
track
and starting to debate Ms. Collins, so if you could please bring it back in, talk about what the actual amendment is.
I was responding to a point of order. Yeah, I was responding to a point of order. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my amendment to the motion, as we've heard, is under the first section here. It says the committee hold a minimum of 3 meetings to investigate the Liberal government's emissions reductions policy. Under B, I would request that we have a 2-hour meeting with 1 hour dedicated to the Commissioner's report and 1 hour on Bill C-73. And under D, I would like to add that at the end, after the date, December 13th, 2024, that the committee begin its pre-study of C-73 and act respecting transparency and accountability within 7 days of the minister's appearance, which I'll once again add could have been more than 1 week ago. And we will be hearing from the Commissioner of the Environment in 5 days.
So it's out of order.
That's it. That's my amendment, Mr. Chair.
I'm just going to recess for a second here. So it's on the... So what we're just in talking here, this should go back into the sub-amendment. Like it should go back into the main motion, so it's out of order, basically. Mm-hmm. So we're going to have to finish this discussion on the sub-amendment first, and then we'll go back into, and then if you want to, once we get back into the main motion, then Mr. Vancouver, if you want to bring that forward at that point in time, that's totally up to you.
Okay, thank you.
So we're back into the sub-amendment, and we are Ms. Taylor-Roy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I'd just like to start by questioning the sub-amendment. We're talking about that right now. Given that the effect or the impact of sub-amendment is, given the logistics of all of the meetings that have to take place first, to push this amendment, the meetings suggested by this amendment, into the new year. And if indeed that's the case, I'm questioning why we are having an emergency meeting today to discuss a study that's going to start sometime in the new year, probably towards the end of January. It would seem to me that if in fact this was an emergency, which I would debate whether it is or not, that adding amendment that pushes this into the new year is not consistent with an emergency meeting. So I'm questioning why the Conservatives are supporting this amendment if indeed they called for this study as though it was an emergency. And I'd also question on the emergency front, why the study they want to do is just investigating the Liberals' policies. We heard from Mr. Deltel that, in fact, what I believe he said, I wrote it down, was that he wanted opposition's suggestions to meet our goals. But yet the study that's being recommended, which won't start now until sometime the end of January, is proposed to just investigate the current policies. I'd be quite happy, and I would love to propose a sub-amendment to the amendment.
Ms. Taylor-Roy, I think, so this is on the amendment. I'll repeat the motion with the sub-amendment, just so we're all clear on what we're actually debating. So that the committee hold a minimum of 3 meetings to investigate the Liberal government's emissions reductions policies, invite Commissioner DeMarco for 2-hour meeting, which we all know that he's coming on Wednesday, the Minister of Environment and Climate Change, along with the department officials for 2-hour meeting, Canada's climate change ambassador for 1 hour. She's never been to this committee at all. Witnesses submitted by recognized parties for the remaining hour. The meetings take place only after the completion of witness testimony on the committee study on climate impacts related to financial system, and that these committee meetings be completed by December 13, 2024, provided that the committee has considered, and this is where the sub-amendment has happened, considered and adopted the draft report on the committee study of the climate impacts in the Canadian financial system before that date, failing which the meetings on the study shall be completed after the holiday season. And then we decided that it is committee's purview. We can demand all we want, and we can set a path, the analysts on a path, and prioritize as we so fit. So that is the discussion. That's what we're having around this study.
Clarification, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I think maybe the confusion is the words "this study" in the last line of the sub-amendment. I think I was reading this study to be talking about the writing of the report and the study on the financial sustainable finance piece, but maybe Ms. Taylor-Roy is reading this study to be talking about the 1064 study, in which case it would be pushing all of the meetings and the study on the commissioner's report, including inviting the minister and the ambassador into the after the holiday season. So I think maybe getting some clarity from Mr. Sauvé, if when the amendment says failing which the meetings on this study be completed after the holiday, is that referring to the meetings that would invite the Minister for the Environment and the Ambassador, or is that referring to the wrapping up the writing of the report on sustainable finance?
Mr. Chair, I believe I still have the floor, and I was wanting to make a sub-amendment to the amendment.
That was just a point of clarification to make sure that we're all talking about the same thing.
Okay. So, Mr. Sauvé, was the idea to complete Ms. Posé's study before we went into the study being recommended by the Conservatives?
C'est exact. Donc, le but...
Precisely. And I think it's a bit clearer in the French version. In fact, the amendment amends Mr. Deltel's motion about a new study. So what the amendment says is, well, before we do the study under 1064, we need to finish the member for Repentigny's study on green finance. That's my understanding.
Thank you, and that's what I understood as well, and that was to my point in my debate here, which is that it is hardly an emergency motion if we're now talking about an amendment that puts the study brought forward in the 1064 into the new year. So my question is this really an emergency debate? Why this couldn't have been done next week, especially when we already have the commissioner coming on Wednesday? And why are the Conservatives wasting, once again, House resources and time to put forward a motion which they clearly, other than perhaps Mr. Deltel, have no interest in. And I say that because we know that the increase in emissions, if anything, our shortfall in reaching our goals has come from the oil sands. And every time we go to talk about any policies which curb pollution from the oil sands, most members of the Conservative members of the Environment Committee here are, try to change the debate, don't want to talk about it, talk about other things. And in fact, they've even opposed the cap on pollution, which would address the biggest cause of what's happening that is pointed out in this commissioner's report. So I would like to make a sub-amendment to the amendment, Mr. Chair. We have a motion and then we have an amendment currently. I'd like to make a sub-amendment to the amendment that was made. And what I would like to do is add after, provided that the committee has considered and adopted the draft report on the committee's study of climate impacts and the financial system before that date, and that the meetings be focused on ways to meet our targets and then continue on. I'm sure everybody in this committee, and I know the NDP and the Bloc, are very concerned about meeting our pollution targets as well, our emissions targets. So I think that this emergency is really about meeting those targets. And so this should be focused on ways to do that and not simply investigating the policies that the Conservatives would like to say are not working. So I'd be very happy to have members of the Conservative caucus give us some ideas on how to curb emissions from the oil sands.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. Could we get that sub-amendment in writing?
Yeah, and I was, you're up to speak next on it, but can we get that in writing, Natalie? Ms. Taylor-Roy, could you forward that to the clerk, please?
Yes, I'll do that right now.
And just as a time filler, and for clarity too, I think, Ms. Taylor-Roy, this will answer a lot of your questions about this amendment, or sub-amendment actually. So the way our preamble actually starts for this motion is, given that Canada's Commissioner of the Environment released an audit that revealed the government is not on track to meet Canada's 2030 targets for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. 2, Canada has the worst record in the G7 for emissions reductions.
Excuse me, point of order, Mr. Chair.
This is all about, hang on, I'm the chair.
No, it's a point of order.
You wanted
No, it's a point of order, Mr. Chair.
Sure.
Okay, we have that motion in front of us. You've read it twice, and it's in front of us. I can read it. So, in all due respect, we don't need to have you read it to us again. I'm quite capable of reading, and I've read it many times.
You asked about targets. Yes,
Mr. Chair, point of order.
Didn't, Mr. Chair. I asked about the Conservatives contributing to meeting those targets.
Mr. Deltel, then Ms. Collins.
So, just at that point, Mr. Speaker, what you're saying is about the issue that we are here today. The issue today is to talk about a motion based on 106.4, because this is a very important point that we have seen a few days ago when the Environmental Commissioner tabled a report, which is not very funny for the government. I can understand and recognize it, but we want to hear them, and we want to go deep in that. So this is the motion that we are tabling. This is the motion that we are talking about. So go on to the target, please.
Ms. Collins?
Just another point of clarification. I just want to make sure that we're all very clear about what we're talking about. Could we, while we're waiting, just get a kind of map out? Let's say this amendment passes of Mr. Sauvé's. We would wrap up the witness committee. We only have one more meeting on sustainable finance at witness testimony. Is that correct? And then we would be waiting for the report to be drafted, which is going to take 4 weeks, so the analyst said. And in that 4-week period, we would be able to get to some of the testimony that this current motion is calling for. Is my understanding correct?
Yes, you are correct.
Okay, so the point that Ms. Taylor-Roy said that this wouldn't start until the new year isn't actually accurate, that this would actually start in November or early December while we're waiting for the sustainable finance report to be drafted.
Yeah, the committee will keep on rolling ahead with whatever study it prioritizes, which will be this one. There's still other holes to be filled up, which I'm sure the committee is well aware of. So this is just bringing in another motion, an emergency study on the reports. So I think we're all as planned to going ahead with this, and I don't know if that clarifies anything. Mr. Arsenault?
Oui, Monsieur le Président, merci. Écoutez, moi, je suis nouveau, je ne vais pas imposer.
Chair, thank you. I'm new and I'm just replacing a colleague. I also chair a committee. I've been listening to everything that's being said from all parties, and I feel like we're talking about the agenda, but we are using up very expensive House of Commons resources. It's a break week, and I wonder if what we're talking about today shouldn't be discussed in a subcommittee. Now, I'm not making a motion, but I'm just thinking in terms of efficiency.
Relevant to the discussion of what's going on.
Monsieur le Président, comme disait ma collègue Collins, c'est un point de clarification.
As my colleague Collins said, it's not a clarification. I'm just wondering if it wouldn't be more efficient to send this back to a subcommittee, and that's all I have to say.
We'll take that on advisement. Ms. Collins?
A point of clarification?
Sure, Ms. Taylor-Roy.
I just want to, thank you. I just want to clear up something that was said, because I think there's confusion in the committee right now as to when this emergency motion that the Conservatives have brought forward would actually commence. And I've heard something different from Mr. Sauvé than I've heard from Ms. Collins, and Mr. Sauvé has put forward the amendment. So I want to be sure, because I know Ms. Posé was very clear about what she wanted done, that we are all on the same page in terms of what this amendment means. So perhaps we could ask Mr. Sauvé, who has put forward the amendment for Ms. Collins, to once again reiterate what his understanding is and what this means for this emergency motion.
Monsieur le Président,
Chair.
Hang on, I got to add Ms. Collins in there as well. Just if there is this relevant to what you asked to ask Ms. Collins, or do you want to continue on with the debate?
I was just was going to say that I spoke to Madame Posé right before this meeting and spoke to her about the fact that there would be time between when the witnesses wrapped up and when the analysts would be able to start give us a first draft that we could dig into. And she expressed that she was comfortable with us continuing on with business like this business of the 1064 and our other things like the Jasper Fire and the Net Zero Accelerator in those meetings in between while we're waiting for our draft report. So I'm also very curious. I just want to make sure that this amendment is in line with that understanding.
Okay, and Mr. Sauvé, did you want to have anything else to clarify for Mr.
Bien, comme j'allais.
Well, as I was going to say, and I apologize, Chair, I didn't know I had to wait for you to recognize me before speaking. But as I said earlier, this motion aims to prioritize Ms. Pose's study. So there's no exception here. The idea is simply to finish the study before the holidays.
I guess I have an English copy of Ms. Taylor-Roy's amendment. Did you folks want it read out here, or did you want it in your email inbox? Or it's only in one language. But it's only in one language.
Mr. Chair, Could we maybe just get clarification from the clerk on the point that we're kind of going back and forth about? Given the wording in the sub-amendment as it's put forward right now, would it be the clerk's understanding that we would, in the time between when the witness study wraps up on the sustainable finance study and when we receive a draft report that we can then dig into, that we are able to continue with our regular committee business, including the witness testimony from the Environment Commissioner, the Minister of Environment, and the Ambassador, and et cetera, if there's time for that while we're waiting for the report to be drafted. Could we just get clarity from the clerk that that is all possible while we are waiting for the analysts to provide us with a first draft report?
It's the committee's decision, I guess, from what the clerk's telling me. And if we so deem it, that's the way it'll happen. Now, I would think, just listening to the committee members, I think that's the way we expect it to happen. We're going to have to be working on something, right? So whatever we pick as priorities, that's the way we go. And by the sounds of it, by this debate on this motion, I would say that this is going to be one of the priorities, but that's yet to be seen, I guess, as well.
Another point of clarification, Mr. Chair.
Sure.
I'm just, thank you. I was under the impression that scheduling meetings and the logistics of this is the business of a subcommittee and is actually committee business, and not really the essence, shouldn't be the essence of an emergency debate, especially when it's taking up such valuable resources. So I'm wondering if we could just refer this perhaps to the subcommittee to look at the committee business and the scheduling, and then get back to us at our next regularly scheduled meeting so that we can actually figure out when to do these different meetings.
Well, the fact is we are debating a motion right now, and that is what's on the floor. And so I guess that's that. So we'll be back to the debate of this motion, and then the sub-amendment so this is on Ms. Taylor-Roy's.
Monsieur,
Mr. So this is on the sub-amendment of the amendment.
No,
right?
it's
This
a
is on Ms.
sub-amendment to
Taylor-Roy's.
the amendment. It's a sub-amendment to the amendment.
Which is, and then so we're all on the same page, provided that the committee has considered and adopted the draft report of on the committee study of climate and impacts of the Canadian financial system before that date, and that such study focus on ways that we can reach our emissions target, in particular ways that we can reduce emissions from the oil and gas sector, which is the sector which is preventing Canada from meeting its goals, failing which meetings on this study shall be completed after the holiday season. So that's the sub-amendment to the amendment. And Mr. Arsenault and then Ms. Sauvé. Mr.
je l'ai dit à Monsieur le Président que vous avez à juste titre dit que nous sommes dans un débat.
You said it's a debate, but I just wanted to add that if I'm not mistaken, the committee is master of its destiny. So if people think that it makes more sense to discuss all of this in a subcommittee, the committee can do so, even if we're in a debate, if it is the will of the committee. But as you said, of course, we are in a debate. But you could also suggest to the committee it might be wiser to send this to a subcommittee.
Thank you. Mr. Arsenault. Oh, Mr. Sauvé, sorry about that.
Oui, Monsieur.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to receive the sub-amendment in writing in both official languages so that I am aware of what we're voting on.
Okay, is it okay if Mr. Deltel, we are working on that currently, is it okay if well, I guess we'll just suspend for a recess for just a little bit. Get this straightened out. have a copy of the translated motion, sub-amendment from Ms. Collins. So I'll give you, Mr. Sauvé, I'll give you a couple minutes to have a look at it. And then we'll just, so I'll recess again just very quickly.
Écoutez, en ce qui concerne le sous-amendement,
When it comes to the sub-amendment, I'm a little ambivalent. I think it would be worth rereading the motion that led to the study. Unlike the other people here, I'm not a member of the committee, so I just want to make sure that it isn't in contradiction with the goal of the study.
Mr. Deltel.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to vote against Ms. Taylor-Roy's sub-amendment. With all due respect for my colleagues, I think it shows to what extent this government and its members of Parliament are absolutely desperate when they see what's going on. After 9 years of this government, let's remember that the Prime Minister was very proud to go to Paris, to the summit there, and say Canada is back.
Government, Canada is not back. Canada is way back. That's the reality of this government after 9 years of taxing people, lecturing people.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. Is this debate on the sub-amendment, or is this debate on the study as a whole?
Sub-amendment.
Okay, so I just questioned the relevance of the Liberal record to the sub-amendment.
Because in my mind, and maybe some members can disagree, but I think people who are watching us today understand it, because the sub-amendment is just to change a channel, to put our eyes elsewhere, while you have in hand a document that has been tabled not by the Conservative Party of Canada, not by a group of interests, not by the oil and gas sector. It's coming from the Commissioner of Environmental, the most objective guy in this country to evaluate the performance of Canada. Are we on the right track right now? Are we achieving the goal that we have fixed many years ago? The truth is not. The truth is not there. So this is why, c'est pour ça, Monsieur le Président, que les gens...
And Mr. Chair, that is why people watching right now are sure to notice that with the sub-amendment, MPs are in a desperate position. They are hoping that Canada is back, but actually we're not at the forefront of anything. We are at the back, at the end of the list. And this is per the Commissioner, who did a study, and despite all of the discourse, all of the speeches, and all of the taxation imposed by the government, we are not going to attain our targets. And when the government spits out all these incredible figures, then, in fact, the Commissioner is able to look at those figures and concludes that the figures are not reliable. So that is not from the mouth of a Conservative MP. It's not from the industry. That is the Commissioner of the Environment who objectively states that the figures are not reliable and lack transparency.
And because this does not seem to be focused on the sub-amendment at all, unless you can tell me how it is.
Well,
It looks like another filibuster to me, Mr. Chair.
I don't think that I can receive any lesson from the government about from the government. Yes, talking about filibuster today. Just my point. But this is what debate is all about. But the debate is based on the fact, and the facts are coming not from the Conservative Party member of Parliament, but from the commissioner.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, I didn't hear a ruling on my point of order. I was wondering if you could rule whether this current debate is on the sub-amendment or whether it is on the main motion.
It's not a point of order. It's on the sub-amendment.
My question is relevance of the debate.
Actually, that's
yes,
not
it is relevant. It is relevance of the debate to the motion at hand. And the motion at hand is the sub-amendment.
It is.
So you're saying that this sub-amendment that you could perhaps read out as you've read out the whole amendment several times, or the whole motion, I don't believe it has anything to do with the sub-amendment that I made.
If I may, Mr. Chair. Well, the point is that in your in the sub-amendment of the Liberal government, Liberal Party members here, you're talking about the oil and gas industry. Sorry, folks, but the oil and gas industry is not the target that you have not achieved. The federal government, after 9 years, failed to achieve
Point of clarification,
the goal.
Mr. Chair. The sub-amendment is not about the oil and gas industry. The sub-amendment is asking that this study be focused on the very issues that Mr. Deltel is talking about, which is how we can meet our targets. That is the emergency. And in Mr. Deltel's preamble, he stated that he wanted to hear opposition parties' ideas on how we could do that. And in fact, the oil and gas industry is the only
Mr.
sector
Chair,
that
this
has increased.
seems like debate.
Agreed. Let's debate. Mr. Deltel, you still have the floor.
Écoutez, Monsieur le Président, au risque de...
Listen, Chair, I will conclude with this. The current attitude that we're seeing from departmental ministers is really too bad, and it shows to what extent this government is completely out of touch and disconnected from people's reality. But unfortunately, the facts are brutal in the report by the Commissioner of the Environment. Pretty words do not allow us to reach our objectives, and especially the fact that they are making the figures say whatever they want to. As the Commissioner said, the reduction targets are not reliable, and that is the result after 9 years of lecturing everyone else on the environment.
Roy. And then Mr. Leslie.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Hang on, I'm just reading out the order here. So we have Ms. Taylor-Roy, Mr. Leslie, Ms. Collins, Ms. Longfield, Mr. Sauvé. And yes, point of order.
Just 2 points of order, Mr. Chair. One, I would like clarity because I believe we all agreed at the on the 20th. Also, my friend and colleague seems confused. He keeps implying that emissions are from the government. They actually are from the oil and gas sector, not.
Well, someone at bigger play your half of it was cut out, so you may want to check in your connection, Mr. Van Couverton, if it comes down to a vote.
Would you like me to try again on my point of order, Mr. Chair?
No, that's good. Next,
I'd
you brought up 2
I'd like
points.
to make sure that my point of order was on.
They
on
both
record.
weren't points of order, by the way. Okay.
The first one indeed was a point of order where I asked for clarity on November 20th meeting.
That didn't come through at all.
November 20th, we all agreed that the Commissioner of the Environment would appear.
Yes.
Thank you for that clarification.
Mr. Leslie, or Ms. Taylor-Roy? You still want to talk?
Yes, thank you. Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, I do. And apparently the scope of conversation or debate on this sub-amendment is fairly broad, so I'd like to actually refer to the Commissioner's report that was put out, and I'm sure everyone has it in front of them since that's the subject of this motion, and can see that actually emissions have come down, especially when you look at emissions intensity and the growth in the environment, the growth in our economy, rather. Up until the point of, other than the recession in 2008, which was during the Conservative administration, which took quite a while to recover from, you saw a drop in emissions, but then they started to come back up again. And it is only since this Liberal government's policies have been put in place that you've actually seen a reduction of any sort. And this is with a growing economy, which is obviously has an impact on emissions. So I would say that, you know, in all due respect, Mr. Deltel, that if your concern is truly about us meeting our emissions targets and the emergency is that we are not getting to meet our emissions targets, and I know that the NDP would agree with this because they're very concerned about the oil and gas sector's emissions. And we know from this report that the oil and gas sector is the only sector that is continuing to increase emissions, and it's coming primarily from the oil sands. I'm sure that they would also be in favor of making this a very focused effort because the emergency is the climate crisis. And what we should be focusing on as members of parliament and what we should be using this time on is to really work collaboratively to come up with suggestions as to how we can confront that climate emergency. And I would be very, very interested to hear Mr. Cran and Mr. Leslie's suggestions as to how we could fight climate change and what more we could do to actually meet our emission targets. So I think that putting this small sub-amendment into the amendment, which simply says, let's focus on the problem here. Let's not continue to politicize things. Our problem is meeting our emissions. And yes, I agree. We have not made enough progress. I agree. It's in the report. But we are making progress, which is the first time in our history we've done that. And certainly something that would not happen if we were to listen to the leader of the opposition right now who suggests that the only thing we do is invest in technology. Because in fact, we are investing in technology and we are doing other things. I know that, you know, Ms. Collins and the NDP have abandoned making polluters pay through our price on pollution program now, but you know, trying to make sure that the oil and gas sector is actually held to account and that we find creative solutions, ways working together that we can reduce emissions is very important. And in fact, I would actually even say this emergency meeting may be justified if in fact that's what we're trying to do. If we're trying to work collaboratively to come up with ways that we can expedite the reduction of emissions, then this is probably a good thing. But it's not the sense I get from the committee. And I do hope that, you know, the Bloc and the NDP can see through what's being done. And I agree 100% with the Bloc on the fact that the important study that we're doing that Ms. Posey put forward on sustainable finance should be completed first. We're in the midst of that, and that is an incredibly important part of aligning the financial sector with our climate goals. So I'm all in favor of that. But in addition to that, I think we should specify, if we're going to move forward with this motion, that the work we do here in committee is actually to find solutions and not just to point fingers. Because this government has done the best job of any government in terms of reducing emissions. Is it enough? No, it's not enough. And Ms. Collins reminds me of that often. And I'm happy to have her here supporting us and knowing that she also wants to fight pollution. And I do hope that all of us can come to that consensus that what we need to do here, the emergency truly is the climate emergency, and that what we should be doing in this study that the Conservatives have brought forward is to working together to find ways that we can in fact meet our targets. That would be worthy of this study, and I think it should be done after this study on sustainable finance. And so I would say this sub-amendment, which simply says, let's put a focus to this study. Let's make sure we're talking about what matters here, what we all want to see, which is to have polluters pay and to reduce our emissions, to make Canadians healthy. Let's agree on that. Clearly, that's what this motion is talking about. And then clearly, it's what Mr. Deltel said in his preamble, which we can go back to look at. So I think Mr. Deltel's on board with this as well. And I think we can all move forward in a direction and show the Canadian public that we can work together. And that, in fact, what we want to do is make sure that our planet is healthy, make sure that we take care of the health of Canadians and the health of our environment as well as the economy. And that we can do that by all coming forward with really great ideas to reduce emissions, to fight pollution, to make polluters pay, and to ensure that Canada does excel as one of the best in the G7. So I would I am obviously speaking in favor of this sub-amendment, which adds that component to this motion, and I hope that all of those here on this committee, virtually or in person, who want to do the same, who want to ensure that we have progress, will support the sub-amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Leslie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was anticipating this meeting could be relatively short, so I'm a little bit bewildered as to why the government is so inclined to talk about this at such length. But I suppose it does make sense because it's the typical efforts to distract, look the other way, look something shiny over there. This is what they do. And it's a continuation of, I would say, a lack of respect from the government for this committee. And we've seen this with the yet fully unredacted documents for the Net Zero Accelerator Fund, the hopefully someday soon appearance of Minister for Jasper Recovery, Mr. Randy Boissonneau. One of the Randys hopefully will show up there. Of course, engrossed in yet another scandal, so perhaps he could be dropped before we get that opportunity.
Point of order, Mr.
We
Chair.
don't seem to want to have.
Got a point of order?
That's completely irrelevant to both this committee and this study.
Go ahead, Mr. Leslie.
Sure. And again, I think this is clearly an effort to delay and distract, maybe get us into the new year, just hopefully change the channel. And it seems as though we, as members of this Environment Committee, are just a bit of an inconvenience. We'd rather kill time than actually address some real important things. The Environment Commissioner's report was stark. It stated that we are not on target for our emissions reduction goals. And while the government may have all sorts of bluster to say that, oh, we are on target, we are doing it, I'm going to believe the independent Environment Commissioner, not the Liberal Party government that has real skin in the game. I'm going to go with the objective observer who said, quote, the government is using unreliable emissions reduction estimates and is lacking transparency on emissions reductions and projections. A pretty damning statement. And we already have 2 carbon taxes in this country, and the plan is to quadruple those. And yet, if that's not enough, Minister Guilbeault has been exposed as trying to get a new global carbon tax on international shipping to drive up the cost of everything even further. It's like the best efforts ever to try to drive Canadians into poverty. And they're already doing a very good job of that. We have 2 million individuals going to food banks each and every month. And clearly, the intention is to just simply make us poor. They're getting there, and that's why I think it's so important that we have a carbon tax election and stop them. We know Canadians are worse off under the carbon tax. It is clear to anybody and everyone that is paying it.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. The member is now talking about the carbon tax and a carbon tax election. And again, this is a point of order regarding relevance. We are supposed to be debating the sub-amendment, and I see no connection between the sub-amendment and what the member is now debating. So I'd like you to rule on that, please.
Sure.
Yeah, I'll allow it. It's within the scope of the amendment, or the amendment and the main motion. Go ahead, Mr. Leslie.
Thank you, Mr.
Mr. Chair, we're debating the sub-amendment. Would you consider it in the scope of the sub-amendment?
Well, it better be, because it's all relevant to the main motion. So yes, I'll allow
we're debating the sub-amendment, not the main motion.
Again, I've ruled, Madam Taylor-Roy, I have ruled. Thank you. Mr. Leslie, please go ahead.
I'd like to challenge the chair on that, please.
Okay. This is to allow Mr. Leslie to keep on speaking. Is that what you're asking?
No, I'm challenging the chair.
Point of order.
Sorry.
Point of order, just to clarify, I think when someone challenges the chair on relevancy, it would just mean that Mr. Leslie would have to get back on track. He wouldn't end his speaking.
That's what I was asking for. Thank you, Ms. Collins, for clarifying that.
Okay. Mr. Leslie, go ahead.
Wasn't a challenge.
Sure, I will happily bring it back. And I am glad to hear that Ms. Taylor-Roy is as excited as I am for a carbon tax election.
A challenge on the floor, it's non-dilatory.
Je veux comprendre qu'est-ce qui se passe là.
I'd like to understand what's happening. chair's decision was challenged? I'd like to understand what's happening.
Being this is my second time at chairing, I interpreted Ms. Taylor's worries as being challenged. Meanwhile, Ms. Collins clarified that normally what we do is I either deem it relevant or relevant, and I ask Mr. Leslie to bring it back into relevancy. I thought it was all right. So I think Mr. Leslie, I was allowing some latitude there. Mr. Leslie got the message, so I was going to allow the debate to go forward. But if you want to challenge me as the chair, that's why I asked the question. What are we actually challenging the chair on?
Yes, to be clear, I did challenge the chair, Mr. Chair, and I challenged it on relevancy of the debate on the carbon tax and cost of living to the sub-amendment that we are supposed to be debating at this time.
And Mr. Chair, just a point of clarification. If you then change your decision at this point, do we have to vote on it, or can we just all as a committee be adults and agree that the chair's ruling has changed, that he's asking Mr. Leslie to bring it back to relevancy?
Absolutely.
Well, she called the vote, so I guess we have to vote. And that's non-dilatory.
Who called the vote?
You challenged the chair. You did.
Well, I know I'd already challenged the chair, but Ms. Collins just said, could it be a friendly outcome? And I said, yes. If you agree that Mr. Leslie was off track and asked to bring him back on track, I'm fine with that. That was all I was trying to ask for.
So you're not challenging the chair now?
As long as the chair changes his ruling to agree that Mr. Leslie was not on track with the sub-amendment and asks Mr. Leslie to get back on track, I am fine. I don't need to challenge you. You've changed your ruling. It was the ruling I was challenging.
Okay, Mr. Leslie, I guess we'll make it official. Can we please keep it on track? Thank you very much. And please continue.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just as it relates directly to the sub-amendment, this is obviously yet another opportunity for the Liberals to attack our oil and gas sector. Again, distraction is the best tactic that this government could come up with because their tax plan is not an environmental plan, and the Environment Commissioner has clearly showed that it is failing. It is all pain and no gain. And that is why it is so vital that we, as soon as possible, do the right thing, the honorable thing, and let's have a carbon tax election. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Leslie. Ms. Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think I want to say thank you to Ms. Taylor-Roy for some of her comments about the climate crisis generally. I think we are in a climate emergency, and the oil and gas sector is the sector that is driving up our emissions. And as much as the Conservatives might not want to admit it, that is a fact. That said, the government is the one who is responsible for regulating this industry and putting in place the policies that would drive down our emissions. A strong emissions cap, all of these things are vital if we actually want to drive down our emissions generally and specifically in the oil and gas sector. I'm not sure how I feel about this sub-amendment. Honestly, I think the report from the Environment Commissioner, it is damning. It is heartbreaking. It is, as much as the government wants to claim that it is a climate leader, we are not on track to meet 40 to 45% by 2030. We have 6 years, and the report lays this out very clearly. That, we have 6 years to do the majority of the reductions that we need, to meet our 2030 targets. And it is this is an emergency. I'm hesitant, honestly, to support the sub-amendment, mainly because I think there's a bit of redundancy. The report talks about emissions reductions, and I think there will be an opportunity to talk about the things that we can do to reduce our emissions. I think the report itself is something that we do need to focus on, and we do need to ideally have the government come to terms with the fact that they're not on track, that Canada has the worst record, in the G7 for emissions reduction, that we have had unreliable emissions reductions estimates, and there's been transparency issues. All of these things are really important for us to cover, and I'm hesitant to have a government who wants to try and avoid those conversations. And that said, I think it's really clear that the oil and gas sector is responsible for the bulk of our emissions. It is the sector that is emitting more than any other sector, and the government, unfortunately, with their emissions cap, has decided to give them a watered down policy that allows them to continue emitting. Doesn't actually force them to bring down their emissions as much as that we are relying on other sectors to reduce their emissions. These are companies that are making record profits right now. And I have to say, I am also a little bit hesitant to support what the Liberals are bringing forward, in part because both Mr. Vancouverden and Ms. Taylor-Roy said false things about my positions on both C73, which I fully support a study on C73. I've been reaching out to Liberal members asking to try and work together to get this motion passed, to stop the Conservatives from filibustering. And I've been trying my best to try and get this committee to function. And so I'm feeling a little bit frustrated with Liberal members when I have been reaching out and trying to figure out a way to actually dig into these really important issues. And I hope that on Monday, if we have committee business, that we can pass a motion on C73. It is a pre-study, that bill is not coming to committee anytime soon, but I would like us to dig into it. So, I think part of me is wary of this sub-amendment because I see the Liberals trying to avoid accountability so often. But I'm still mulling it over, to be honest.
Okay, Mr. Longfoot, Field.
Thanks, Chair. And I would like to say that I like the idea of the study. I really like the amendments that are being brought forward. Mr. Sauvé, welcome. You can see that this isn't an easy committee sometimes, but it's good to set the parameters of our studies, what we're going to be focusing on. I think accountability on the government is definitely something that this committee needs to focus on. I also think the committee needs to continue its focus on the oil and gas industry as the major contributor. So I don't think it's in any way avoiding responsibility. I think both amendments clarify what we want to study, and I don't think leaving either of those out would help us with our parameters. I also like the amendment that was mentioned earlier by Mr. Vancouverden to make sure that C73 is also included in this agenda item that we have in front of us. I would like to see us get to that amendment, and so I would love to support both the amendment and the sub-amendment as they're written, and I'd like to see another amendment come forward that we could support on C73. Then we're set up for our schedule. We know what we're doing, and we can make sure that we hit our goal of getting these studies all done. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Sauvé.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. Chair, before talking about the sub-amendment, I'd like to reassure my colleague for Portage Lidsger, who was talking about killing time. We're not the ones killing time. It is time that will end up killing us one day or another. So that should be in everybody's minds, I think. But to come back to the sub-amendment, I'd like to make the following comments. When it comes to its admissibility, we are meeting today under 1064, if I'm correct, and that means that if 5 members of the committee ask for a meeting on a topic, then we meet to discuss it. My colleague for Oak, pardon me, well, I can say her name in committee, right? Ms. Taylor Roy's sub-amendment changes the nature of Ms. Posey's study, which was adopted under 1082. So I don't think that at this stage of the debate, and nothing stopping the committee from changing this along the way, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Chair, the nature of the study under 1082, but we're not dealing with a study under 1082, we're dealing with a sub-amendment on a motion under 1064. So I don't think that Ms. Taylor Roy's sub-amendment is admissible, in fact.
And I guess that's a question. The committee allowed it, like, it's up to us to debate it whether we vote on the amendment or not. So ultimately, it comes out down to us. We have the debate about it. If we decide as a committee it's not admissible or not going forward, we'll ultimately it'll get voted out down at that point in time.
Okay.
So that's how that works.
OK. En ce cas-ci, de toute manière,
All right. Well, in this case, whether it's...
You did hit on many main points you're exactly right in what you're thinking. As far as, it takes away from the main motion, it takes away from your motion. So that's 100%. So continue on.
Dans ce cas-ci, si je me prononcerai.
Well, in this case, and I won't talk about the admissibility of the sub-amendment, but the members of the committee have undertaken a study for many months now with a defined objective. I think we're nearing the end of the study, and so changing the very nature of the study at this point, and I'm not commenting on the relevancy or the importance of looking at emissions, but in my opinion, it wouldn't necessarily be a good idea to change the nature of a study that the committee has been studying for months.
Ms. Taylor-Roy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Sauvé, I will reiterate that I am in support of the amendment that you made and Ms. Sauvé's position. The study we have been doing on sustainable finance is very important, and I do believe that we should finish it. It is, in fact, part of how we can meet our emissions targets if we align our finance with our climate goals. What I've tried to do in my sub-amendment was not to change the study we're doing, but to add so that it can be positive, so we can actually look at other ways that we could, in fact, meet our climate targets. So while we're looking at the Commissioner's report and acknowledging that there are shortfalls, we're not denying that. And Ms. Collins, to your point, we have the report from the Commissioner on the Environment and Sustainable Development. We know that there are shortfalls. We know that there are issues. We want to address those just as well. And I think that you have some great ideas to add to what we can do. I'd welcome your comments on the cap on pollution. We're in a bit of a quandary because of the provincial jurisdiction on this. And so ways that we can actually put this in place where it's not interpreted to be a cap on production and therefore provincial jurisdiction. I would love to hear from you and from the members from the Conservative Party. I think it would be a really fruitful discussion. So I'm not saying don't look at what the Auditor General has said or the Commissioner on Sustainable Development. I said, let's look at it. But let's make this useful. Let's talk about how we actually solve those problems, not just criticizing. That's what we're here to do. We're here to work collectively to make this a better place. And so I ask you, and I just want to clarify as well, Ms. Collins, just a point you raised earlier on this sub-amendment, which was my comment on the NDP not now supporting the price on pollution program. And it is factual that the NDP did reverse their position on making all polluters pay to saying that you do not want the price on pollution or the carbon levy to be applied to consumers. So you have changed that position. I'm not making up something. It was simply saying that you have changed your position on that. And I know on biodiversity, we're both concerned, and we know that biodiversity goes hand in hand with climate change. So I think Mr. Vancouveren's motion or amendment that hopefully we'll get to include reference to that at some point that we're going to be looking at that is also important. So I'm putting this forward because I want us to be focused on results and not only politics and laying blame. If the Conservatives are truly concerned with the Government of Canada's position on reaching our emissions targets, I'm sure that they would want to work with us to come up with solutions. And I know that's what the NDP does and wants, and I know that's what the Bloc does. And I know there are members of the Conservative Party who also want that. So let's use our time wisely to actually, look at what's happening in that report. We've all seen it. We can all read it. We've seen that and we all accept it. But let's also move forward and actually make real progress, especially for the young people of Canada who desperately want to see us address this issue. So I'd appeal to you that I'm not trying to in any way, change the focus to some shiny new target or do whatever Mr. Leslie said. I'm actually trying to say, let's use our time if we're going to focus on this to move forward, to find solutions. And I think all of us have good ideas. I would welcome them. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Collins.
Just I thought I would quickly respond to Ms. Taylor-Roy's comments. I have, and I continue to say that carbon pricing is an essential tool in our toolbox when it comes to tackling the climate crisis. My New Democrat colleagues and I have continued to support carbon pricing, but we are committed to a plan that would make the biggest polluters pay the most, to bring down costs for Canadians, to meet our emissions targets, and to unify people when it comes to taking on the climate crisis. And despite being in power for 9 years, the Liberal government has failed to do this. Unfortunately, the Liberals have fixated on their own specific design of consumer carbon pricing as the best and only way to fight the climate crisis. And for some reason, when anyone dares to critique that, they try to use this as a political wedge. And it is a disservice to climate action. It is a disservice to Canadians. And when we have, industrial carbon pricing, which makes up 40% of the emissions reduction plan between now and 2030, when we have methane regulations, when we have the emissions cap, all of these are doing the bulk of our emissions reductions. And I know Ms. Taylor-Roy genuinely wants to talk about these things because these are critical policies in our fight to tackle the climate crisis. But to use consumer carbon pricing as a political wedge, I think is doing a disservice to everything that you think you're fighting for. And it is too bad. And it also makes me very wary of the kind of disingenuous Liberal rhetoric when it comes to actually holding the biggest polluters accountable.
Thank you, Ms. Collins. So, seeing no other debate, I will call the question on the sub-amendment. And just to give you a heads up, once we get done this, Mr. Leslie, you're back on for the amendment after this.
Mr. Ali?
Yes.
Mr. Longfield?
For.
Ms. Taylor-Roy?
In favor.
Mr. Vancouverdin?
In favor.
Monsieur Arsenault?
En faveur.
Monsieur Deltel?
Contre.
Mr. Cram? Mr. Leslie?
Sorry, against.
Monsieur Sauvé?
Contre.
Ms. Collins?
Against.
That's 5-5. Mr. Mazer?
Against.
So it's 5 yeas, 6 nays.
Okay, now we go back to the amendment, and Mr. Leslie, you are first up. And Mr. Deltel.
Oui, Monsieur le Président, j'aimerais déposer...
You had a point of... Oh, okay. Okay, go ahead. Mr. Delta?
Non, je mets mon nom sur la liste.
What do you say?
He put his name on the list.
Oh,
Sorry,
okay.
Mr. Leslie.
Okay, back to Mr. Leslie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Good. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, sorry, I seem to be frozen on my end. I will be brief. For all the talk of the emergency regarding our nation's and the world's climate, I am rather appalled by the hypocrisy of when it comes to a report that highlights failure, the government members are ragging the puck and they refuse to acknowledge that it is an emergency to identify why they're failing. The cost in real person lives and livelihoods that it's having on Canadians. Let's get this done. Let's get to work. Have the commissioner, have the minister, have the ambassador come and explain why and how we are failing, and let's do it immediately.
Thank you, Mr. Leslie. Mr. Arsenault.
Non, ça va, Monsieur le Président.
That's okay, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Mr. Deltel.
Oui, Monsieur le Président, alors j'aimerais...
Chair, I would like to make the following amendment to the initial motion. So you have the text, and these meetings must be finished by December 13th, 2024, without which the committee will have studied and adopted the study on green finance, without which the study will be completed after the holidays, and then the rest of the motion.
Do we I'm getting some messages in here. Some people are froze up, and but who is up first? I guess.
Okay, if I may.
I'd like to speak to this, Mr. Chair.
Okay, we'll just recess for a couple of seconds here to get all the wording straight. Okay.
And I'd like to speak to this as well.
Yeah, I see you there now. Good, thank you. I'll just recess for a second. sub-amendment has been sent around into your inboxes, and Mr. Deltel will clarify what Ms. Taylor-Roy was asking, and then Mr. Van Koerden is up next.
Oui, alors merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to my colleague, Ms. Taylor-Roy. So you have a copy of the amendment that is being proposed into both official languages, and it ends this way.
Target be dealt with while the report on sustainable finance is drafted.
Thank you. Mr. Van
So,
Koerden.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry, if that is an amendment, then don't we have to vote on the other amendment first before we move to a new amendment?
This is a sub-amendment.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I heard Mr. Deltel say amendment.
Yeah, sorry about that clarification. It's a sub-amendment.
It is a sub-amendment. That's what I was trying to clarify. Thank you.
Mr. Van Koerden.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And perhaps while I'm speaking to this, the clerk could check, because it seems that the amendment and the sub-amendment might be in conflict. One says that it must be done, and the other said it must be drafted. So we're just going through what we're being asked to consider to vote on here, and it doesn't seem to be completely in order. Look, I would just once again point out that we have been doing this de facto committee business meeting as an emergency. And in our last couple of meetings, the Conservatives filibustered so that we wouldn't be able to move on to discussing whether or not we could have a pre-study on C-73. And during that filibuster, they filibustered a meeting where the Minister of the Environment offered to come and discuss these issues. These are very real challenges that we're facing. The Commissioner very clearly pointed out that the increases in emissions are due to the oil and gas sector, most notably the oil sands industry in Alberta. And the Conservatives want to continually suggest that these are government's emissions, that these emissions are a result of government action or inaction, while we've been actively encouraging the oil and gas sector to decarbonize, to modernize, to become more efficient. We've enacted regulations. We've enacted over 100 measures to lower emissions, to decarbonize, and to reduce the emissions that are related to oil and gas exploration and production in the oil sands. And indeed, we've heard from those companies. We've delved into some of their results, and we can very, very clearly see that the only sector that hasn't reduced their emissions is the oil and gas sector, most notably the oil sands. And before us, we have an emissions cap, a pollution cap that we would like to put in, so that the oil and gas sector needs to consider to invest some of their astonishing $60 billion in revenues and profits into a more efficient process, so that their sector isn't the dirtiest, the most carbon intensive oil product in the world. That's something that we shouldn't tolerate as Canadians. We should ask for the oil sands to innovate and to join the rest of the world in decarbonizing their energy products. They're important products for all of us. Next week, most of us will fly to Ottawa. Some of us will drive electric cars and others will take trains, but all of those things at some stage require, that transportation requires fossil fuels, but we should be demanding that those fossil fuels be produced with the lowest carbon intensity possible, and that's not what we've been seeing. So I would very much welcome a study on how Canada should and will achieve these goals. We are on track to meet our 2030 goals. Much more must be done, such as a pollution cap on the oil and gas sector, something that the Conservatives are against, something that Premier Daniel Smith has spent $7 million on an ad campaign in Ottawa, driving trucks
Point
around.
of order, Mr. Chair.
And, once again,
Yes,
we
you have a
see the
point of order?
Conservatives stepping in to ensure that I don't get to finish my sentence on the oil and gas sector.
Just as per my colleague on the other side previously asked for clarity on relevance, and asked you as chair to ask the member to return to some semblance of relevance on the amendment, I would ask the same.
Point taken, Mr. Leslie. Yes, thank you. Mr. Van Koerden, if you could bring it back onto track and talking about the sub-amendment, that'd be great.
No, certainly. Can I ask if the conflict between the amendment and the sub-amendment has been established by either you or the clerk?
It has not, and That's not correct, actually. If anything, it clarifies it. So that is not actually an accurate statement.
Could I ask for clarity as to whether or not any of these amendments have indicated that we might have a visit from an additional visit from the commissioner? Can I ask if we're asking the minister to still come on Wednesday, or if Wednesday's pre-established visit from the commissioner of the environment would be in line with this new study?
Yes.
So we would be replacing the pre-established visit from the Commissioner of the Environment with this one, or it's a novel witness testimony from the Commissioner on the Environment for this study?
Commissioner's coming in on Wednesday, and that's the way it is. That's what's
Yeah,
going to
because
happen.
the committee collectively decided that we would, but what does this motion or amendment determine? That he's going to come again?
Yes.
Okay. What I would like to know also is whether, you know, I'm concerned that we're bumping all of this important committee business, whether that's the completion of our sustainable finance meeting, the meeting on C73 on biodiversity that I've been asking for weeks, that members of this committee claim to support, yet here we are debating other things. And when we're going to find time to do this, given that we've got a short window ahead of us. You know, and I'll just say again that like members of the Liberal side of this committee have been in favor of a visit from the Commissioner of the Environment, and we've encouraged a visit from the Minister, but the Conservative members have filibustered throughout that process and not allowed that process to come to fruition. So as we've stated, we welcome a visit from the Commissioner to discuss more thoroughly how Canada will meet our climate objectives. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Taylor-Roy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm just trying to clarify that we are actually now debating the clause that was added that says, provided that the study on gas emission reduction targets be dealt with while the report on sustainable finance is drafted. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, very good. So a study on gas emission reduction target, I had, in fact, in the sub-amendment that was voted down, suggested that we actually do look at gas emission reduction targets and how to achieve them, and that was voted down. So I'm wondering whether this one can now stand, given that, in fact, it's saying a similar thing. And the other thing I just wanted to point out is that the sub-amendment I had put into the amendment, which asked us to come up as a committee to collaboratively work together to come up with recommendations on how we can meet our emissions goals, was voted against by the NDP and the Bloc, who both say that their main concern is meeting our emissions targets and that we're not doing enough. So I'm perplexed as to what is going on right now in this committee, and perhaps the agreement that has been made between the Conservatives and the NDP could be made clear so that the public could understand what's happening, because this is certainly not in line with the NDP that I know and that Ms. Collins has voted and passed on trying to make progress on this. So I'm just really quite confused, and I don't understand, the amendment that this sub-amendment is amending basically said that we had to adopt the draft report. And this one says that we can do it just while the report on sustainable finance is drafted. So are we supposed to adopt it, or are we supposed to just have been in the process of drafting it? Because to me, it says two different things here. So I was wondering if I could get clarification on that, and also perhaps clarification on what the deal between the NDP and the Conservatives is regarding this, so that we can be transparent and actually understand what's happening here so we can address it, because I don't understand right now what's going on at all.
Okay. I think it's pretty clear what's in front of you as far as the amendment to the main motion, and I don't know. I guess we'll see if we find out from Mr. Sauvé if he can offer some clarity for you.
En fait, on est...
Well, we're looking at the sub-amendment, if I'm not mistaken. And my comment was similar to that of the member for Aurora Hulk Richmond Hill, and maybe I could ask my honorable colleague from Louis Saint Laurent to specify. I'm not a member of the committee, but it's difficult for me to understand how the committee can move forward on the study, the initial study, and work on this second study that it proposes to undertake under 1064. So I am hoping to understand how that can actually be done. I don't object to it per se, but I am having trouble understanding how it's actually possible.
Okay, Mr. Deltel.
Oui, merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Nouveau.
Thank you, Chair. And I thank my colleagues from the other parties.
Là, je vous rendais hommage. Là.
Point of order?
Yes, Chair. I just wanted to have a clarity on one thing. As you know, today is a Friday. We call this emergency meeting between 12 for 2 hours. Normally, it's my Friday prayer time. I go from 1 to 3 o'clock for my Friday prayers. I still have a chance, but I just wanted to know that when is the hard stop of this meeting, whether I can catch my prayer or not. Just wanted to find out. Thank you.
The hard stop's 8 o'clock tonight.
So it's for 8 hours meeting?
If that's what it takes. We have resources till 8 o'clock tonight.
Wow.
So we'll get on with the debate. Maybe if we get the debate done, we could be done here in 5 minutes.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Chair.
So, if I may? If I may continue? Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Alors oui, merci beaucoup aux collègues.
So thank you to my colleagues from other parties for giving me this opportunity to respond to the questions. And I'd also like to note that I really truly welcome this new member, and I am very happy that he's here at our committee today. So, to answer the question, the report about finance and the environment is being worked on, and without revealing any internal operational secrets, I can tell you that it's very onerous work. And so while the analysts are working on the report, which is substantial and requires a lot of time, we'll be able to continue our work and actually begin this work about the Commissioner of the Environment. And that is why we will be able to do these two studies and why we are offering this option of completing the work proposed by your colleague and supported by the entire committee, and this other study that we are debating today.
Thank you, Mr. Deltel. So, I have Ms. Taylor-Roy and Ms. Longfield, but since this has gone on beyond the 2 hours, the clerk, I was just talking to the clerk, and we'd like to take a 10-minute health break just to everybody have a reset here, and we'll get ready. And so I'll suspend or I'll recess for 10 minutes. Thank you. Thank Deltel.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I'm asking for unanimous consent to withdraw the motion that I earlier tabled.
For that? Seeing no debate, that's good, that's passed. Mr. Deltel?
Monsieur le Président, j'aimerais déposer.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to table the following motion. Given the recent reports by Canada's Commissioner of the Environment, the committee agreed to the following schedule. 1. The meeting on November 18, 2024 be dedicated to 1 hour to hear from department officials and 1 hour to hear from witnesses from recognized parties on the sustainable finance study. 2. The meeting on November 20th, 2024 be dedicated to the Commissioner of Environment's fall reports for 2 hours. 3. The meeting on November 25th, 2024 be dedicated to the briefing on the Net Zero Accelerator for 2 hours. 4. The meeting on November 27th, 2024 be dedicated to hearing from the Minister of Environment for 1 hour on emission reductions policies and 1 hour on Bill C-73. 5. The meeting on December 2nd, 2024 be dedicated to 1 hour to hear from Canada's Climate Change Ambassador and 1 hour to hear from witnesses submitted by recognized parties on emission reductions policies. 6. The meeting on December 4th, 2024 be dedicated to hearing from Minister Randy Boissonneau on the Jasper wildfire study for 2 hours. 7. The meeting on December 9th, 2024 be dedicated to hearing from the Commissioner of Environment on emission reduction policies for 2 hours. 8. The meeting on December 11th, 2024 be dedicated to hearing from witnesses from recognized parties on Bill C-73 for 2 hours. 9. And the meeting on December 16th, 2024 be dedicated to reviewing the draft report of the Sustainable Finance Study.
Very much. That's it. Mr. Deltel, any discussion, Madam Posey, Leah Taylor-Roy? Okay,
Oui, merci le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to make sure that the motion that we're voting on will set aside the meeting that had been suspended last time. If this motion is adopted, then everything we discussed last week, will that be removed? Because the meeting was suspended, and usually if a meeting is suspended, then the topics have to come back at the next meeting.
Ms. Taylor-Roy, did you have your hand up, or are you
Yes.
in agreement of this?
Yes, I did have my hand up. Just one brief question. I just wanted to clarify with Madame Posey that this list has 1 more hour of witnesses for the study on sustainable finance, and then we're going to have a meeting to look at the draft report. And so that was all that was left to be scheduled. Madame Posey was 1 hour of witnesses on the study on sustainable finance. Okay, thanks. And so basically this is wonderful that everyone has agreed to this. So the emergency motion, is this now the emergency motion that we're voting on? Because we had a 104 meeting, right? This is an emergency meeting?
This is what it replaces it, but this is what we're debating during our emergency meeting, correct?
Okay, so this emergency meeting was called, so basically,
and then we ended up coming to a conclusion with this motion. So this is the motion that's on the table right now, and we've had quite a bit of discussion and pretty well all agreement right across the board.
So this is, okay, I just wanted to comment that this looks to me like committee business, what we have here, a scheduling of meetings. And I just still am perplexed as to why we had an emergency meeting for 4 hours using House resources and time to come to basically what the subcommittee should have done for committee business. But yes, I will be supporting it because I love the collaboration that we all got together and came to a conclusion.
Thank you. So, Ms. Collins.
Just wanted to maybe respond to Ms. Taylor-Roy that really, I think in a large part, this is because the Conservatives were filibustering and our committee business wouldn't have gone forward without this. And we wouldn't be able to tackle the climate emergency. And also they were filibustering C-73, which should have been proposed in committee business, which was the choice of the Liberals not to do that. So.
Okay, so do we have an agreement for this motion? Call it. There you go, all in agreement. Motion is passed. And I adjourn.